Wow. We're in bad shape, folks. We're in bad shape. These are your Democratic leaders.
There is I think, a fair criticism of the Democrats for not locking this in statutorily.
Yes.
In the chances they've had in the past. But also, people should not forget this history. In 2004, I believe it was, in the run-up to the 2004 election, it may have been after the 2004 election, Hillary Clinton was one of the stronger voices in saying, we need to be a little bit softer on abortion. We need, in fact, I think that's part of the reason why Obama in 2007, when he was running, was adamant about passing this, because there was a move in the Democratic Party to sort of soften the edges. I mean, we see, you know, and I'm only picking on Hillary Clinton because she just happened to sort of do the same thing about transgender rights in a piece. It's unclear to me how it was presented. I didn't see her complain about the way that it was written in the Times. Not necessarily your paper, but
the Financial Times.
I was in the Financial Times.
Yeah.
But we see this tendency of Democrats, and that is why, you know, and fair enough. I think, you know, when Obama got into office, he said it's no longer a legislative priority. When he said it was the first thing he was going to do, he didn't know there would be a financial crisis. But nevertheless, the fear of Democrats to sort of push these things that have these type of popularity is, I mean, that we're still stuck in this triangulation mentality with these people.
Yeah, I mean, there's
young man.
The decision not to try to codify Roe really is baffling. I mean, there's the cynical explanation, right, that, you know, as long as Roe isn't codified, then you have, you know, you can say, hey, people come out and vote, donate, et cetera, et cetera. There might be a vested interest among sort of the various kind of like, you know, politicians and the nonprofit industrial complex and everything around not just doing this legislatively. But at the same time, ostensibly, you know, Roe is the thing that unites the Democratic coalition. I mean, even in 2009, you didn't quite have a filibuster-proof majority in those first few months, but you had a large majority in the House. And the number of Democrats who would have blanched from codifying Roe, which is nationally very popular, I have to imagine is pretty small. So it's mystifying to me why this didn't happen. I mean, there's again a lot of explanations, but it didn't, and it just hasn't been a priority. Part of me thinks that there just was disbelief that the Supreme Court would take this step, or that the Supreme Court even ever be in the position to take this step. I mean, I remember hearing, I remember people are making this argument that, oh, you know, Republicans are never actually going to overturn Roe because it's too good of a thing to get their base all riled up. It's too good of a motivator for their voters. And there seems to have been a belief that Republicans and conservatives from the court and the conservative legal movement didn't really mean it, but they very clearly meant it.
Yes.
And this is, I mean, this is sort of one of the things I occasionally rant about is just sort of the incredible level of cynicism about politicians to the point that people just do not believe anything they say they're going to do, which is to the benefit of sort of the worst actors in politics. Because if everyone believes that politicians are just always going to lie, then the people, when Donald Trump says I'm going to ban Muslims, and it's like, oh, he doesn't really mean it, and then he does it because he meant it. And like most of the time, even if people are duplicitous politicians, even if they aren't fully honest, most of the time they mean what they say, and we should take that seriously. When a bunch
this is actually something that people don't know, and kind of they get enraged that you say it, is that when a politician says something, most of the time, especially when they're making a concrete promise, they mean it. When Joe Biden says, I have no sympathy for young people, when he says nothing will fundamentally change, he meant it. When he said he wasn't going to forgive student loans or legalize marijuana, He meant it. When he said, I'm going to increase funding for the cops and the military, and God bless our troops, that's what he meant. When he refuses to utter the word abortion, he meant it. When he says he doesn't support getting rid of the filibuster, he means it. Joe Biden means it.
Bunch of reactionary.
Did he say he would codify Roe? I get the point here, but well, the one thing I will say is the closer a politician gets to the center, the more of a liar they are.
Say we want to overturn the right to an abortion. They mean it. Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion on Dobbs, said the court should overturn Griswold v. Connecticut, should overturn Obergefell, should overturn Lawrence v. Texas, right? Like, that isn't idle rhetoric. Like, he means it. And there are lots of people in the Republican Party and in the conservative movement who agree with him. And so the reaction should be not to say, well, you don't got to worry about that stuff. The reaction you should act as if, no, they're going to do it. If they get the opportunity, they're going to do it.
We should say Thomas also oddly left out Loving Virginia. But
although I think he'd overrule that too. I don't think that would stop. I don't think his marriage would stop him from doing that.
No, they could still be good friends. It is. I mean, and that dynamic, we should say, reminds me of that story. And for the life of me, I can't remember where there's been focus groups where they have presented like the Republican platform to voters.
Right.
And the voters say like, no, we don't believe that that's what the platform is. Like, it's so outrageous that they do not believe that it's going to happen. And to some extent, like, I feel like we are entering a period of time in our politics where, and it's really just a question of like, does this take 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, where, because we're going to get West Virginia and EPA next week. And that is going to be the next step in essentially the destruction of our administrative state. Right. And the ability of our government to regulate stuff. We're not that far out from, more salmonella and more E. coli in our food. And I mean, the financial markets being far less regulated, and environment and clean air, clean water. I mean, just on and on and on. And we have multiple generations who have grown up without even the contemplation of this. People in the 60s, they could remember what things were like 30 years before. There was like an institutional memory, and where, 60-hour work week? Sorry, New York. We're not going to, you can't put a cap on how many hours we work our sweatshop folks. That was in the body politic in the 50s and the 60s. And it became just an assumption it's always going to be like that. And I feel like there's a whole mess of people who are about to find out it doesn't always have to be like that.
Right. I mean, I'm sure you can call this silver lining, but the closest thing to a silver lining here is precisely this fact, right? That's sort of like what Americans have grown accustomed to is a government that protects their rights, is a government that does at least something to regulate the pollution in our air and in our water and in our consumer goods. And I think there is an opportunity. It's not going to be automatic, right? It's not going to be an automatic reaction, but there's an opportunity for a political party that wants to take it in these rulings, in making the case that like, this is what the Republican Party wants. Like, at the end of the day, this is what it wants. It wants to essentially unleash the most powerful corporations and the wealthiest people to do whatever they want. It wants to unleash sort of like the worst busybodies you can imagine to control your life, to control who you can marry and whether you can end your pregnancy and all sorts of things. And it wants to restrict your right to vote so they keep you from doing something about it. So let's like collectively stop these people. But again, this requires sort of like, you don't have to say that these people are the enemy, but you have to treat them as opponents, as people who need to be like beaten, which is a thing that...
Can you imagine the Democrats being like, we've got to beat the Republican Party? Can you imagine Joe Biden being like, Republicans are bad? Impossible. That's an impossible dream.
That, the generation of Democrats who helped build the administrative state, the FDR generation, knew how to do, right? Like they did not hesitate to treat Herbert Hoover as someone who needs to be like swept away to the ash heap of history.
Total fucking loser party, dude. And look at this chat. Biden says the right to choose is fundamental, but you don't say something is fundamental, but you say something is fundamental but is not prepared to call for a change to filibuster to protect abortion rights. How can you vote for this loser? Very cool. The president has been very clear. He's not for expanding the court. That's completely within the right of Congress to change the Supreme Court side. That's not a breaking of a constitutional law. That's within their plain power. He doesn't support them using their power. That's it. Republicans maximally use your power to whatever means you want. We won't. And this is the response, chat. People aren't angry at the Republicans. They're angry at the Democrats. A political shift is beginning to take hold across the U.S. as tens of thousands of suburban swing voters who helped fuel the Democratic Party's gains in recent years are becoming Republicans. So the Democrats are losing working class people and suburbanites. They're losing black people and white people, Latin people and Asian people. They're losing across the fucking board. More than 1 million voters switched to GOP in warning for Dems. This was published today. Political shift is beginning to take hold across the U.S. as tens of thousands of suburban, there you go, swing voters who helped fuel the Democratic Party's gains in recent years are becoming Republican. More than 1 million voters across 43 states have switched to the Republican Party over the last year. The previously unreported number reflects a phenomenon that is playing out in virtually every region of the country. Democrat Republican states, along with cities and towns, in the period since President Joe Biden replaced Donald Trump. Would you rather be part of the team that's winning in our team sports politics? You got it! Nobody wants to be a fucking loser, and Joe Biden is the definition of a loser. That's just in our American spirit. We want to be with the winner. Nowhere is the shift more pronounced and dangerous for Democrats than in the suburbs, where well-educated swing voters who turned against Trump's Republican Party appear to be swinging back. Over the last year, far more people are switching to the GOP across suburban counties from Denver to Atlanta and Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Republicans have also gained ground in counties around medium-sized cities such as Harrisburg, Raleigh, Augusta, and Des Moines. Ben Smith, it's more so a rejection of the left than embracing the right, said Smith, a 37-year-old professional counselor who's transitioned away from the Democratic Party began 5 or 6 years ago when he registered as a libertarian. Okay, so this guy is not a fucking... What? Get the hell out of here. Why are you quoting this dipshit? Over the last year, roughly 2/3 of the 1.7 million voters who changed their party affiliation shifted to the Republican Party. In all, more than 1 million people became Republicans compared to about 630,000 who became Democrats. Roughly 4 months before Election Day, Democrats have no clear strategy to address Biden's weak popularity and voters' overwhelming fear that the country is headed in the wrong direction with their party in charge. Because the Democrats are the party of the status quo. The Democrats are the conservative party, and the Republicans are the fascist far-right party. We don't have a party that believes in leftward change. You have rightward change or status quo. And people desperately hate the status fucking quo. And yet, the Democrats have no ability whatsoever to deliver even modest, incremental, nothing change. And while Republicans have offered few policy solutions of their own, the GOP has been working effectively to capitalize on the Democrats' shortcoming. Biden and Democrats are woefully out of touch with the American people, and that's why voters are flocking to the Republican Party in droves, says RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel. She predicted that America's suburbs will trend red for cycles to come because of Biden's gas hike, the open border crisis, baby formula shortage, and rising. I mean, this is all horseshit, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Biden's gas hike, that's not horseshit. The Democratic National Committee declined to comment. The losers won't even give a quote to the AP. The losers won't even make a quote to the AP. What a pathetic fucking country. Holy shit. In Iowa, Democrats used to hold the advantage of party changers by a 2-to-1 margin. That's flipped over the past year with Republicans ahead by a similar amount. The same dramatic shift is playing out in Ohio. In Florida, Republicans captured 58% of party switchers during the last years of the Trump era. Now they command 70%. In Pennsylvania, Republicans went from 58 to 63% of party changers. The AP found that Republican advantage was larger in suburban fringe counties based on classification from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention compared to smaller towns and counties. Republicans boosted their share of party changes in 168 of 235 suburban counties. Those included suburban counties across Georgia, Iowa, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Texas, Ohio, Virginia, and Washington state. The Republican advantage was nearly universal, but it was stronger in some places than others. For example, in Lorain County, Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, nearly every party switcher over the last year has gone Republican. Jesus Christ. This is what the Democrats are doing with the money that you send them, chat.
Which side are you on? Chris Matisse supports Donald Trump and is a veteran. David Valadao voted to impeach Trump and against his border wall.
You voted to impeach. You're clearly out of step with the majority of Republicans.
Chris Matisse is the pro-Trump Republican running for Congress.
In Republican primary contests this election year, some candidates are getting a boost from an unexpected place: Democrats.
And Republican Chris Matisse, a true conservative, 100% pro-Trump and proud.
That ad, which ran in California, was paid for by...
House Majority PAC is responsible for the content of this ad.
The House Majority PAC is affiliated with Democratic House Leader Nancy Pelosi. The strategy playing out in many states goes like this. Democrats give a boost to Republican primary candidates with extreme views, hoping they will be less competitive in a general election than a more moderate GOP candidate. It's a risky move with potential to backfire. Former Senator Claire McCaskill is a Democrat who has talked about how she used this tactic to win her race in Missouri in 2012. Welcome back to All Things Considered.
Thank you, Ari.
Let's go back a decade. You said that in the last 2 weeks of that 2012 Republican primary, you spent more money to boost Tea Party candidate Todd Akin than he spent on his entire primary campaign. What were you thinking as you spent millions of dollars to boost a conservative Republican candidate running for Senate in Missouri?
Well, every race is different. In my situation, there were 3 viable candidates, and Todd Akin was kind of the weirdest one. I knew he might say some weird things if he were nominated, and so he had less money. So we took a poll, figured out what Republican voters would really like about him, and we spent millions of dollars promoting him by telling Missourians all the things that the Republican primary voters liked about him, but that general election independent voters didn't like about him.
That strategy worked. And you say it was based on an assessment that he was, in your words, the weirdest candidate, and that he might say some weird things. 4 years later, a candidate who said a lot of weird things was elected president. And I think many Democrats thought Donald Trump might have been the weakest candidate in a crowded primary field. So there are clear risks here. Do people who try a strategy like this, are they playing with fire?
Well, there's certainly...
This is the ad.
I'm Claire McCaskill, and I approve this message.
The most conservative congressman in Missouri, as our senator, Todd Akin, a crusader against bigger government. Akin would completely eliminate the departments of education and energy and privatize Social Security. Todd's pro-family agenda would outlaw many forms of contraception. And Akin alone says President Obama is a complete menace to our civilization. Todd Akin, Missouri's true conservative, is just too conservative.
So she literally saves Todd Akin money on spending advertising dollars and campaign effort to introduce himself to the voters. She's building the grassroots and the energy of her opposition because she has no active fucking ideas of her own. Jesus.
Well, there certainly are risks, and it's certainly different today than it was a decade ago.
Yeah,
and
but the risks are for the population, not you. You're a rich politician. It's a win-win for you. Sure, if the right-wing ideologue wins, what are you going to do? You fucking move. She doesn't live in Missouri. Where do you think she lives now?
And let me point out the major difference. When Todd Akin said what I expected him to say, something that was off the wall in the general election, unlike today, the Republican leadership all came together and rejected him. We have watched the leadership in the Republican Party hide under their desk at the amazing, horrible things that Donald Trump would do. So it's different today. I'm not sure you could count on Republican leaders to stand up and reject a candidate that said things that were abhorrent to most voters.
Are there candidates whose positions are so extreme, whether it's endorsing QAnon or opposing American democracy, propagating the false narrative that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, that you think just the risk of getting them one step closer to federal office is simply too dangerous?
I think it depends on the district. If there is confidence that the voters in that district are going to reject that extremism, then I think elevating them may be a smart strategy. But it is a big mistake to do it in a district where a Trump candidate has as good or better chance of getting elected than a more moderate one.
Yeah, I'm just thinking confidence is never proof, right? A person can be sure that Hillary Clinton's going to win the presidency and still be surprised the morning after the election.
Point well taken. We were all surprised by Donald Trump. But these are tough races, and I do not regret for a minute what we did a decade ago. And at the end of the day, if you look at some of the crazies that like to get attention, their voting record is not that different than the leadership of the Republican Party.
Oh, isn't that odd? And yet all these centrist Democrats and leaders of the Democratic Party spend every fucking day talking about how they want a strong Republican Party, but yet they're not any different. That's odd. Let's look this up. We need a strong Republican Party. Nancy Pelosi, U.S. needs strong Republican Party. Biden, we need a strong Republican Party. Pelosi, we need a strong Republican Party. Biden, we need a strong Republican Party. Let's see, who else can we find here? We need who else said it? I want to see a strong Republican Party. Jim Clyburn. Oh, I have an idea. We need a strong Democratic Party. That's odd. I don't see any Republican quotes. That's odd. I also don't see any Democrat quotes. That's odd. I don't see we need a strong Democratic Party from Donald Trump. So weird. So odd.
It isn't as if they're going to be able to do things a lot differently than what they're currently doing in Washington in the Republican Party.
So far this year, this tactic has had mixed results. It worked in the Pennsylvania governor's race. It didn't in a California congressional contest. Next week, there are primaries in Colorado and Illinois where the same dynamic is playing out. So what advice, besides tailor it to your district, to your state, what advice do you have for Democrats who are trying this maneuver?
Well,
how conservative is Ron Hanks? Hanks was rated one of the most conservative members in the State House. He says Joe Biden's election was a fraud. Hanks wants to ban all abortions, and he wants to build Trump's border wall. Hanks even sponsored a bill that would allow concealed carry with no permits. Ron Hanks, too conservative for Colorado. Democratic Colorado is responsible for the content of this advertising.
First of all, I certainly would recommend that you spend some time figuring out what the Republicans voting in the primary actually support. And it would be nice if you also had a handle on what the independent voters in your area, your district or your state don't like. And if those two match up, that's what you should be talking about, because the beauty of the ad we ran against Todd Aiken a decade ago was the very things that made him attractive to many people in the Republican primary, made him unelectable with independent voters in the general.
Is this tactic
that's just
always
not true? That's just not true. And if that were the case, you would have never been elected because your policies are unattractive.
Ethical? I mean, whether or not it works, is it an honest way to inform voters who are making important decisions about who gets to create laws?
Well, listen, I'm somebody who thinks dark money is evil, but I do think that it is ethical as long as the voters know. I mean, in my instance, I said, I'm Claire McCaskill and I approve this message. And there was nothing in that ad that I didn't believe. I did believe Todd Aiken was too conservative for Missouri. As it turned out, then Missouri agreed with me.
That's former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri. Thank you for speaking with us.
You bet.
And now more from
I mean, that's like the Democrats are just totally useless. Todd Aiken only lost because he had that incredibly bad comment about a legitimate rape. Claire McCaskill tries to pretend that she saw that coming, but it was a lucky fluke gaffe. And then she went on to lose her next election to Josh Hawley, one of the most right-wing fascist people in the entire Congress. So that strategy She's talking like she's some sort of electoral genius. The only thing she knows how to do is lose. What a fucking loser. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.